Hello and welcome from the University of Georgia Office of Research. Today is Tuesday, June 30th, 2020, and thank you for joining us for this session of Research Matters Live on navigating UGA Elements. My name is Mike Terrazas and I'm the Director of Research Communications at UGA. We look forward to providing you some useful information and answering your questions as best we can. Before we get started, I'm going to mention a few housekeeping points. This is being conducted as a Zoom webinar, which works a little differently than a Zoom meeting. Here's what you need to know. Attendees are automatically muted and cannot turn on their cameras. If you could, wait until the end of the presentation to ask your questions, or that's when we'll answer them. And you can ask your questions in a few different ways. You can always type it in the chat and choose whether the question is visible to everyone, only to the panelists, or to a single individual. You can use the Q&A function, which you'll see along the bottom of your Zoom window. You can use the raise hand function, also located along the bottom of your window. If you raise your hand, we'll assume you want to ask your question by voice, and we'll call on you by name and enable your microphone while you ask your question. Next, we are recording this session, so be aware that not only are faces and voices recorded, but also all chat messages, even the private ones, so be mindful of what you type. We'd like to hear any feedback you'd care to provide about today's session, including suggestions for future topics. The Research Matters Live page on the Office of Research website has a suggestion form that you can access through a big red button at the top of the page, and we encourage you to make use of it. You should see the URL for that page come up in your chat window in just a minute here. And finally, if you find this presentation useful, please tell your friends and colleagues. This is a new series and word of mouth is important to making sure the UGA research community is aware of it. So thank you for anything you can do to help us spread the word. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. Let me introduce our presenters today. We've got Bob Scott, Professor of Chemistry and Director of Special Projects for the Graduate School, and Carly Surratt, UGA Elements and Faculty Business Process Coordinator in the Office of the Provost. Bob and Carly, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. So as Mike said, I'm Bob Scott. I'm actually a chemistry professor, but I also have appointments both in the grad school and Office of Faculty Affairs. And Carly and I sort of together help pilot the implementation and the improvement of UGA Elements for the university. So I have one slide to show you, and before I start that, you can see on the title slide there are two URLs, two websites that you can go to. So if you want to learn more about either Elements, which is what we'll spend most of our time on, or ORCID, which we hope to touch on, you can use those URLs. So I wanted to take a moment with this single slide to give you a feeling for how Elements gets its data. Elements is essentially a professional activity repository for UGA. And it creates automatically profiles for every faculty member, every postdoc, every graduate and professional student on campus. And we do that by pulling information from authoritative sources that the university maintains. So the first thing that happens in Elements, whenever a new employee shows up, Elements goes out, finds them, finds out a lot of information about them, finds out what departments and schools and colleges and centers and institutes they might be associated with, and pulls all that into Elements to create the profile. So if you're a new faculty, you show up to UGA, you should already have an Elements profile essentially waiting for you. That builds what we call the users in groups. Users of Elements are all the employees at the university, and we put them into groups based on HR information. Then on top of those users, we pull in information about what positions they hold, what memberships they have, a bunch of profile information, even education information, and build the profile from that. So that's the core of what's in Elements. It's information about a person and details about what they do at the university. Then on top of that, we build activities. And the activities fall into 4 separate types, which are called modules in Elements. The first one is what Elements calls publications, but it's really more than publications. It's all scholarly and creative works, and we've created a number of activity types that span all the disciplines on campus. Publications come from external databases, and so there's a search engine built into Elements, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But then there are also ways to manually import other scholarly and creative works. Then there's a section on teaching activities, and we pull in all courses that are taught and recorded in Athena. And so all the formal coursework you're associated with will show up connected to your profile. We also pull in information from the graduate school, and there are places to add manual information about other teaching activities that you perform. Then there's a section on proposals, grants, and contracts. Most of this information comes from the e-research portal in the Office of Research. So Sponsored Projects provides all the information that they record about proposals submitted in grants awards. And then if there's other sources of grant funding, there's a place for you to manually create those. And then there's sort of everything else, which in Elements is called professional activities. And it spans all sorts of different activities. The way you think about it is, if you want to record something on your CV, then there's probably a place to put it in Elements. So we've created a lot of specific activity types to contain the activities that people want to keep track of. And everything in the professional activities module is really entered. Okay, that's a summary of how the data gets into Elements. Let's just jump into a live demo. And I'm doing this in a test system. So the data system is a lot like what's in production, but not quite the same. So just be aware of that. When you log into Elements, and by the way, if you go to that URL I gave you on the first slide, there's a login button right at the top of that page. You end up on your home page. So this is my home page in Elements. You have control over a photo. And on this home page is essentially a summary of the 4 modules I just described to you. So here's what's called the publications module. Here's grants, here's professional activities, and down here is teaching activities. So the home page is meant to be an overall summary of your activities. Often there's another panel between this header and the My Summary, and it's called My Actions. And that will show up when there is something that Elements thinks you should be doing. So you'll see that once in a while, and you should try and follow it to see what Elements wants you to do. I want to make sure that you recognize that there's this black bar at the top of every Elements page, and it never disappears. It's always there, and there's a help button. Actually, useful help. I see that it timed me out already. When you click the help button, you end up on this first screen, which gives you some highlights of the kind of help you can find. All of these links point to a support site which is outside of Elements. We've created it in Confluence, and it's actually a pretty good help site. We try to cover almost everything you would ever want to do in Elements there. So if you're ever at a loss for figuring out how to do something, take a shot at visiting the support site, and you'll probably find what you need. Okay.
And if you don't, feel free to reach out to us and let us know it's not there, because we'd like to talk to people all the time about that.
And there's a link over here called Request Support, which is a good way to get a hold of us. Okay, so we'll come back to this help site once in a while throughout the demonstration. So back to the home page. I mentioned that there's a summary. If you want to look at or edit any of these types of activities that are summarized here, you just click the link So for example, in my professional activities, I have these 2 consulting activities. If I click on that, it brings me to a detailed page. And this is the way all of these work. You'll get a list of what's in the particular category. And then if you click on the link, that's the title of the activity, it'll take you to all the detail that's in Elements about that particular activity, okay? And every link to every activity type works essentially the same way. Now, that's how to look at and edit anything that you've put into Elements or was brought into Elements by another system. But you also need to be able to add new activities to each of these modules. And so, for example, if I wanted to add another professional activity, there are multiple ways of doing it. I find the easiest is to click this Add button that's at the top of that module panel. And when you do that, you get a pop-up window that lists all the different kinds of professional activities that you can enter. And these were developed based on communications with large numbers of faculty and administrators about what we should be keeping track of. Now, you may have trouble deciding which one of these is appropriate for a particular professional activity that you want to record. And that's why we've designed on the help page, the first icon here in the information section is what goes where. If you click that, it links out to a section of the support site that is titled, I did this, where does it go? And what this is our attempt to collect real life activities, right? So over here, categorized by modules are activities that we have recorded. And then it says, for example, this activity, you'd put it in a professional activity called event administration, and you'd choose some of the fields this way. So we've tried to help people translate from a real professional activity into what it would look like in Elements. And we keep adding to this. This is a living document. It's also true that many schools and colleges have developed their own customized, I did this, where does it go, lists. And so you might see if you have access to one of those. But this is a good place to start, to figure out where you want to record activities. Okay. So that's the home page. But I mentioned in my slide that one of the things we build on top of the person record is a profile. So if you click the photo, and you can click this photo, and there's a number of other ways of getting here, but that seems the easiest to me. You end up on your profile page. This is not the home page, this is a profile page. There's some information about me, there's some email, phone numbers, and things like that, contact information. And then there's a set of information about what I do. And so there are actually 3 different places that you can write a narrative about yourself. One is called the overview, and that's essentially a biographical sketch. Then there's one for research interests, and then there's one for teaching summary, teaching philosophy, teaching experience, that sort of thing. And so you can fill in any or all of those. Then there's experience. So for example, there's a section on UGA appointments, a section on other academic appointments. And then if I edit this profile, this is just a view of my profile. If I wanted to edit it, I click this button up here. And now you find that some of these fields are editable. If you see a padlock like this, and you hold your mouse over it, it says, this field is locked and cannot be edited. That's because phone numbers come from authoritative sources, and they have to be changed in those authoritative sources and then re-imported to Elements. These narratives are all editable. So if you see a pencil icon, you can edit it. All UGA appointments come from central HR and from one source. And so those are locked. If there is a problem with these, we have to change that in authoritative source. But the academic appointments are editable. There's another section that I haven't used, so it doesn't appear for any non-academic employment that you've had. The degrees that form your educational record are locked because they come from authoritative sources in faculty affairs. But you can add certificates and certifications, post-grad training, language competencies, and then web addresses and social media. So here's how to generate links to your other, the other systems where you have profiles. Okay. Now I mentioned that the ones that have a padlock, you can't change in Elements. And so in order to correct errors that you find in that material, back on the help page, there's a section called correcting data, right? So if you click that, it goes to a page, again, in the support site, and it lists all the possible problems with authoritative data and how to make sure they get corrected at the authoritative source. Back to my profile. And you can see anytime you click a picture, you get to the profile. There's another aspect of this page, and that's this little box over here on the right called Find a Colleague. So you can actually use Elements as sort of an expanded white pages. So if I wanted to look at the profile for maybe Mike Adams, not the former president, but biochemistry professor Mike Adams. I find him in here, I click View User, and it takes me to his profile. And so I can learn a lot about his efforts here. Notice at the bottom of the profile page, which I didn't go into before, there's another summary of publications, teaching, professional activities. It goes on for quite a while. So you can see a lot about somebody, including what their phone number is or what their email address is, by just doing that Find a Colleague. There's another way of searching Elements data. So you have these tabs up here. Actually, you'll have probably the Home tab and the Menu tab. I only have these other ones because I'm an administrator. And under the Menu tab, you have a lot of selections. One of them under the Explore panel is called System Search. So if you click that, you come to a simple Google-like search page where you can type in anything like coronavirus and do a search. Or you can go to the advanced search page, and here you can be very specific about what you're searching for, who you're searching, and what it returns. So for example, by default, it returns objects, activities from the record, but you can say, just give me the users associated with those. So you can find out who are all the people at UGA working on coronavirus. Or you can say, just show me the people who have grants that are associated with coronavirus, etc. Once again, on the help page, there's a link called Explore Search, which goes to a section on the support site that describes in detail how to use the advanced search option under the Explore feature. Okay, so that gives you a quick feeling overall for what's in Elements. One of the main things that Elements does is it goes out and finds publications that you are the co-author of. And that's done through a search engine, and you have some control over that, how the search functions for you. So again, under the menu, you have a panel called My Account. And one of the sections of My Account is the data source search. So the main thing it does is it uses your name to search for you as an author of publications. And if I go to that page, first thing it shows me is here are all the external databases that I activated for the search engine. And it tells you when it last searched those databases, what the status of the search was. In this name-based search panel, you have control over how the search is done. So one thing is, if you've used different names during your professional career, you can list them all here. You can add as many as you want. Most databases only contain first initials. They don't contain first names. If you have a common name, that's a problem because it makes it very easy to get false positives. But you can also say the affiliation associated with any publication you find for me has to be one of these. And these are the places that I've been during my career, and I've published from there. And so the publications have these as affiliations. And there's a bunch of other things you can do. You can set to make your search as focused as necessary so you don't get too many false positives and you don't miss a bunch of things. Okay. And once again, on the help page, now let's go to the support site. There's a section of the support site that has extensive detail about how these searches can be adjusted. There's a section over here called My Publications. And if you open that, you'll find lots of articles about Elements searching function. Here's how you activate the searches. Here's how to populate Elements with publications. This is a very useful one. This is how to optimize the search to make sure that you get exactly the results you hope. Separately, and I'll show you this in a minute, you can connect your ORCID ID to Elements, and Elements will use your ORCID ID to connect with publications. But not all databases are searches, and not all of your publications are in databases. So there's got to be other ways to get publications into Elements. You could, of course, manually input all the details about your publication, but I don't recommend it. There are many other ways of getting publications. One, if you have a list of publications that you happen to keep in one of these reference managers, like EndNote or Mendeley or something like that, we have instructions for how to import those into Elements. If you can find your publications in third-party websites, databases, like SciFinder Scholar, Google Scholar, or books, there are instructions for how to import publications from all those places. And I find that through one of these, you should be able to find virtually all your publications. If you're in sort of a sciencey or biological sciences discipline. If you're in humanities and arts, databases are really not very good at keeping track of, and so they may be more difficult to find. Although Google Scholar is pretty comprehensive, not very accurate, but pretty comprehensive. And so I was able to load all 200 or so of my publications without ever manually creating one of them. So you should make sure to use these import options if your search engine doesn't find your publications.
And I'll also add there that if you use Google Scholar and there are things that aren't accurate in there, it's sort of easier to import that and then go in and correct than start from scratch.
Right. When you import publications, it creates a record, and you can add a manual record on top of that record to correct some of the problems with the import. Okay, back on this menu tab in my account, that was the name-based search we were talking about. But Elements is also integrated with ORCID. If you don't know what ORCID is, just consider it to be a globally accessible version of your professional profile. And it comes with a persistent identifier that identifies you and is connected with any of your publications when you use it. And there are three things that Elements does with ORCID, and they are these three radio buttons. One is, if you use your ORCID to label your publications, and many publishers now, when you submit manuscripts, actually require an ORCID ID, and more are doing it all the time, then that publication, when it's published, is always associated with your ORCID ID, and that's uniquely pointing to you. And so Elements will use that, and if it sees it associated with a publication, it brings it in automatically, doesn't even ask your permission, because it knows it's you. Separately, you can keep publications in your ORCID profile, and then Elements can be set to read those. So if you wanted to maintain your publication list in ORCID, Elements can import all of that. And thirdly, you can go the other way. If you decide to use Elements to collect all your publications, Elements can push all those to your ORCID account. And so it's a pretty useful integration between ORCID and Elements. The other thing Elements does is when you click this top radio button, it pushes the fact that you're affiliated with UGA to your ORCID profile. Okay. So I mentioned that one of the uses for ORCID ID is automatically claiming publications with which your ORCID ID is associated, but it can also use other ways of identifying publications that belong to you and automatically claim them. If, for example, you also have a Web of Science researcher ID or an archive author identifier, you can use that as an automatic claiming device. Here's where I've set my ID to be used for automatic claiming. And you can also use email addresses. So for example, these are the two email addresses that I know I have used when I publish some of my work, and it can go look for those as well. Okay, that's a pretty good summary of Elements. There's a lot more, obviously, but I leave you with the support site to help with that. There's only one more part of the help button I wanted to point out, and that is that we know that there are some issues that have not yet been resolved by the vendor, and so we keep a list of known issues. And so if you end up having a problem using Elements and you can't figure out why it doesn't work, probably it's already been recognized and it's in our list of known issues. Or if it's not, tell us, and we'll put it in the list of known issues. Okay, so we try to keep this support site pretty current. It's getting a little long in the tooth, so we're going to do some cleanup pretty soon. But it's a massive site, and it tries to cover almost every problem people have had using Elements. So I'm going to leave it there, Mike, and see if there are any questions to handle.
Great. Excuse me. Thanks, Bob, for all that information. We do have a question, someone with their hand raised. Kim Bolin, did you have a question? Kim?
Oh.
All right. Well, we'll just assume that you covered her question in your...
She put her hand down.
Any other questions for Bob today about Elements, for Bob or Carly? Well, Bob, how about I'll ask a question. Are there any new flavors or add-ons or additions for Elements that are coming down the pike soon, and what might those mean for UGA faculty?
Yeah, I can say a little bit about Discovery module, although to be clear, a final decision has not yet been made.
Oh, okay.
There's a new module for Elements that creates public profiles, public-facing profiles from Elements data with decisions about what gets made public up to the user to decide. But we've suggested that that would actually be a logical place for a faculty expertise portal for UGA. And so we're working with the provost office right now to try and determine whether we go that route. We put a lot of effort into designing it, and so we'll when that happens, if it happens, you'll hear an announcement about it.
Great.
And to speak further to that, there's going to be lots of training opportunities and demos and all sorts of things if we do go forward with that module. So stay tuned. We'll definitely have some face-to-face contact and working with staff and faculty on that.
Great. Thanks, Carly and Bob. We have another question that's come in here. I notice my Elements only covers years of employment at UGA. Can I go back further?
So I can provide a partial answer to that. The search engine is not limited to what you've done at UGA, and you can optimize it in particular for your past experience. That takes care of publications. On the profile, there's a place for you to put all of your experience, your appointments that happen either academically or outside academia to be part of your profile. Whether you decide to put in information about other professional activities, let's say, for example, committee member assignments or chairing a session at a conference or those sorts of things, that's completely up to you. Those are manually entered. I made the decision that I was going to put my entire CV into Elements. And one thing we didn't actually mention is that we talked a lot about how to get data into Elements. We didn't say much about how to get data out of Elements. When you go to your profile, there's a button called CV and Reports, and this is a place where you can export different reports about your data. And I see this one sort of out of date because it's in the test environment. But one thing we've designed is a CV. So far, it's sort of focused on the STEM disciplines, but it will be expanded soon. And so you can use everything that you've put into Elements and create a CV directly from it. And so my decision was to make Elements the place where all of this information resides, and then just export what I need to export when I need it. That's also true of ORCID, by the way. I think there has been a Research Matters live session on ORCID integration with Science CV, which is one of the systems used to create NIH and NSF bio sketches. So ORCID also integrates with a lot of other systems to generate output that's used, giving you administrative burden as you go through your research professional life.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Any last questions for Bob and Carly before we let them go today?
I'll just say one last comment. You know, we're always here to help. One thing I love to do is if you can't find where to put something and I did this, where does it go, or activity types defined isn't helping you, I love solving that puzzle with people. So feel free to reach out to either the Elements email or my email directly to sort of look at that together. We've tried to hit as much as we can here, but of course there's going to be things for individual disciplines that may or may not fit into this as it's written currently.
Great. Thanks, Carly. Well, we've got no other questions that are coming in, so I'm going to say thanks to everyone for joining us today. We hope you found the session informative and engaging. If you need to refer back to it, the session recording will be posted to the Research Matters Live website within a few days. And again, please do make use of that suggestion form on the page if you'd like to provide any feedback. And we encourage you to spread the word about Research Matters Live to your colleagues and friends if you found today's session helpful. So as a reminder, the next scheduled Research Matters Live will be Friday, July 10th at 11 a.m. and the topic will be resuming human subjects research. The speaker will be Kim Fowler, who is Director of the Human Subjects Office in the Office of Research. So until then, thank you again from the Office of Research for being with us today. And thanks again to Bob and Carly for presenting. And we'll see everyone soon. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Thanks, Mike.
everybody.
Bye-bye.